Our next session is titled Culture Wars, and our speakers for the day will be Arshia Sattar Faisal Devji, and they will be engaging in a conversation with Antara Dev Sen.
We have seen a lot of incidents in India over the last couple of years, and things have been a little difficult for those of us who believe in liberalism and certain other ideas. I'll just pass the mic on to Arshia. Let's start with what we perceive as a culture war in India right now.
Well, first I want to say that Faisal and I were in university together, and he studied history and I studied literature. And in the way the university was set up, or academia is set up, I never thought in my whole life that you and I would be on a panel together. so that I think is some indication of really how art spaces are accommodating and inclusive and all of that. And it's, I think, for precisely that reason that art spaces are targeted in our culture wars, because if there is one principle of a culture war, it is to divide and to separate and to make us and them. So that's why the art spaces are particularly vulnerable. And I feel that in India, what has happened in the 80s, and this is sort of quite specific to the work that I do, that in the 80s and 90s, the Indian culture war was centered around the Ramayana, and who owned it, and who had the right to tell it. And it changed from, an epic of beauty and love and loss and divinity into some kind of martial, let's go get the bad guys kind of thing. But now the culture wars have become more amorphous, more amoeboid almost, so the enemy is now visible, but you don't know what the enemy is going to attack. So.
Yes, I think it's absolutely. The enemy is visible because we choose to make certain people into enemies, and we have certain cultural markers, I think, by which we mark somebody as an enemy. If you're a beef eater, you're an enemy of nationalism. Is it possible to be a beef-eating nationalist in 2016 India? Most of us would say yes to it, but those in power and those most vocal would probably say no. Would definitely say no. So that's the problem. What we personally believe in and what we are supposed to believe in, I think that's the clash. That more than the war between conservatives and liberals, I think it's a war between what we believe and what we are asked to believe in. What would you say to this?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's interesting to note that the term culture wars comes out of the United States. And indeed, that moment when Arshia and I were in university together in Chicago was, I suppose, the midpoint or the later point of the American culture wars, which had to do with all manner of things, including the flag, including values of certain kinds. That the word value was invested with all kinds of force. And I mention this because it seems to me that the Indian version of culture wars actually has an interesting set of links to the American one, insofar as in both cases, the issues at stake, even though they might appear to be religious on occasion, like the Ramayana that Arshia was mentioning, are actually, in my view, secular, explicitly secular, because they are not theologically phrased, they are phrased in majoritarian terms. No one is making an argument about God. No one's making an argument about beef eating or about any one of these matters that is theological in character. The argument has to do with the values of a presumed majority. And that's it. And that's what makes it actually quite different from Muslim struggles over issues having to do with clothing or with practices, which are phrased theologically. They are not about majoritarianism. And I think that's very interesting. There's something to do with democracy and with the secular as a context for culture wars, both in the US and in India. And I think it's perhaps therefore not very productive to gun for religion or for the theological. I don't think really it's about that. Now, of course, in the process, what might happen is that these kinds of culture wars might marginalize, and again, what Arshia was suggesting with the Ramayana, might actually fragment the theological and the religious and push it aside rather than foregrounding it or bringing it back. And I think that perhaps this is one of the, it's what the term culture war allows us to see, the commonality that it allows us to see between, say, the US and India, even though, of course, there are great many differences between those two moments as well.
Yes, actually the Ramayana is a very interesting example because it's the kind of attitude we've seen over the last couple of years with, the banning of the 300 Ramayanas by Ramanujan, which just doesn't allow intellectual thought. We just don't want you to think of different kinds of Ramayanas. So it was, as most of you know probably, that it was on the list, the required reading list of Delhi University, or JNU was it? DU, Delhi University, and then because of political pressure it had to be withdrawn, because there is of course only one Rama who existed and lived and was born, of course, in where the Babri Masjid now is. So we have to go by that one, not even majoritarian, it's a very politically constructed idea of Rama that we are allowed to talk about, and we are not allowed to examine other realities and other Ramayanas. Similarly, when books like Wendy's book, when Wendy Doniger's book on Hindus, that was not just withdrawn from the market but pulped, so that nobody ever could buy it. That also speaks of the kind of attitude that we, even as people remove from politics, and when publishers do that, that actually gives out a message which is against liberalism, it's against our democratic guarantees, really. So the same publisher, Penguin, of course, stood up against when Salman Rushdie's satanic verses had created an uproar, and when the Muslim fundamentalists wanted banned, Penguin stood up against it. When the Hindu fundamentalists in 2014, I think, wanted it banned, Penguin did not stand up against it. What does it say about culture wars? What is it, just Penguin and the change in Penguin, or is it the change in our society? There are things that we don't want to think about, but maybe we could just talk about that a bit.
No, I think the point that both Faisal and you are making is very quite critical, that this is not about religion anymore. It's about the freedom to think, it's about the freedom to speak, it's about the freedom to inhabit difference, right? And the thing is, I think we become particularly vulnerable because we don't know we're different until somebody points it out to us. So it's like, oh, really? Did I do something that you don't do? Oh, wow. So there's no way that you can protect yourself, even if you wanted to protect yourself. And I think also it's true that the situation we're in now is, I can't think of anybody really who's set out to be offensive. Yeah? But we don't know what causes offense anymore. So you people say, oh, they'll be self-sensitive. But then how can I self-censor when I don't know what is wrong to say? So in a sense, it's very liberating. You keep saying what you're saying, and then one day there's somebody at your door and they say, well, you go to Pakistan, or let's take you to jail. And then you say, oh, wow, I did something terrible. But you cannot anticipate.
Do you think there is a Faisal? Do you want to respond to this in any way?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to ask a question, the following kind of question. Why, for instance, Rama and not Krishna? If you think about modern Indian political thought, it's been resolutely Krishna-focused it's true that Gandhi talked about Ram Raja and Ram Naam, but all Indian political thinkers, to my mind, is the Bhagavad Gita that is the crucial text for modern Indian political thought. Everyone, right? Whether it's Aurobindo, whether it's Bankim's Krishna Charitra, whether it is Gandhi, whether it is Vinoba, whether it is Ambedkar even, whether it is Savarkar, whether any number of people, Tilak, of course, famously, the first guy in a way. Now that, even Muhammad Iqbal wrote about the Gita, all right, wrote about the figure of Krishna as the ultimate figure of action. So it's fascinating how that whole tradition, which has characterized modern Indian political thought, was put aside. And there was a turn to the Ramayana and Rama instead, which had never had this kind of play. And Arshia, I think you wanted to...
This is why I like talking to you, Faisal, because you always make me think differently about what I've done. It just struck me that I think because I've just finished translating Uttarakhand, the last book of Valmiki's text, and it's a book in which Rama is entirely passive, right? He's just listening to these stories, but he does two very big things. He kills Shamuka, who is a Shudra tapasvi, and so he's practicing tapasyas that are not appropriate for him, and he banishes his wife, right? But in these two instances, especially when he's confronted with the fact that he has to tell Sita to go away, he says, I will brook no argument. Please don't talk to me. He tells his brothers. He says, I know what you think, right? But I don't want to hear this. So I think maybe it's the authoritarian or the sort of impassive Rama that has become attractive, because Krishna allows for doubt, Krishna allows for questions. I mean, what could be a more spectacular moment of doubt than Arjuna's in the Bhagavad Gita, right? So there is some kind of back and forth. You can talk about this, but Rama in Uttarakhand is like, no, I'm the king. And when you think of Modi today, it's very much like, oh, I am the king, do not ask, do not question, and don't challenge me, and don't put me in a position where I have to justify my actions. So,
I will not, because I won't even speak in Parliament. So, that is, absolutely. The Maryada Purushottama's Maryada comes from being the strong and silent one when he is doing obvious wrongs. Now, but moving a bit away from the Ramayana, we've also had, it's the same space we're talking about, which is academic freedom. We've seen in recent times the way institutions have been taken over, and where, if there is academic freedom in an institution, then that needs to be stopped, like it was in JNU earlier this year. And young students like Kanhaiya Kumar, who's become a big name now, had been charged with sedition, and they were all put in jail because of what they, we've all been students, we've all talked about politics, we've talked about freedom from hunger. Sadly, it continues. Obviously, we haven't achieved much in all these years, but we have not been put behind bars for such things. So the kind of society and politics that allows that, I think it's beyond just the Ramayana. It's just stifling of freedom of thought and expression in every possible way, including freedom of what we do, freedom of what we eat, freedom of how we dress. When a woman is raped, it is, even today in India, we do talk about what she was wearing and why she was out so late at night. So these are things that are not being, we are not finding solutions to these mindsets, and we actually are, I think, moving more towards the conservative way of thinking because of the kind of propaganda that we are wrapped up in. The liberals have a voice which is not propagandist, and therefore nobody, I think in this post-truth generation, we don't have space for argument. It's just the strong and silent drama that rules our lives. You just say, if you're against demonetization, you're anti-national. If you're eating beef, you're anti-national, you know, that kind of thing. Do you think that is the way that we are going, or do you think that's just a blip which will pass?
Well, it's not a blip, but what I find interesting is that these mobilizations occur in waves. They rise and they recede. At one moment you have love jihad and then it recedes. At another moment you have cow slaughter and it recedes. And you have seen this sort of thing in the past as well. And what strikes me is interesting about this is how a certain kind of Hindutva is unable, or rather unwilling, to institutionalize itself. It takes the form of a populist or popular movement, but even when the BJP has achieved power, there is an unwillingness to institutionalize. And I think that's fascinating. I've spoken to people in the party and said, look, why don't you, do what Congress did with its heroes? So what did they do? Collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, selected works of Nehru, institutions, publicization, nothing has been done. So you have an institution, Vivekananda, you have Deen Dayal Upadhyay, but nothing, no. In all these years, even when they've been in power, the BJP has never made any effort to propagate in an institutionalized manner its history, its political thought. If you want to figure out what the what the works of all these figures are, and they're important, they're interesting, whether it's Golwalkar, whether it's Savarkar, whether it's any number of people, there are no properly annotated academic or even non-academic editions. They are not being reprinted. It's difficult. I had to go to the old Hindu Mahasabha in Bombay to get Savarkar's work because I wanted to read it. And I find that extraordinary, and it makes me think that perhaps the desire is precisely not to do what Congress did.
Exactly.
The desire is to keep it, if you will, superficial, at the level of a movement that is never institutionalized. But does that create a contradiction between a party that's in power at the state level, at the federal level, I should say, the level of the Indian Union, on the one hand, and then these movements which are very intense but transient on the other?
Maybe the reason is that they don't want you to have access to the original text. It's easier to have propaganda if you don't really know what the original text was.
But then, it's very difficult to actually build up an ideology. It's difficult to actually get a following to inculcate, to indoctrinate. There is no indoctrination in that sense. It's a very shallow. None of the people who are out doing all of this stuff, like Golwalkar, of course, after independence, was the one who first brought up cow slaughter as an important issue, but he failed. It didn't succeed at the time, right, in the 1950s or whatever. Okay, now it's back, but there is no link made. Maybe there is some residual memory. There is no attempt to intellectually build up, philosophically build up. It's not impossible to do. It's perfectly valid to have conservative thought in Indian politics. In fact, as others have argued, Pratap Anu Mehta and Ram Goa and others have argued, it's important to have conservative politics and thought in India. And yet there's an unwillingness to actually push it.
I was actually going to cite or mention Ram Guha's article from last year in Caravan, that where is the intellectual right? So I think in one sense, they're unable to institutionalize because they haven't created the kind of intellectuals, or they haven't supported the kinds of intellectuals who actually become ideologues, or who are able to unpack ideology for institutional purposes, But there's, I think, another more malicious intent is, if you keep it at the level of a movement, it's constantly disruptive, and people can be killed because they ate beef and they can be put in jail. Institutions have to are conservative in and of themselves, but movements remain radical. And I think as a consequence of this not institutionalizing or not actually nurturing and developing ideologues, intellectual ideologues from the right, I think that's why we have no discourse at all. There is no public debate there. And I think one of the most moving pictures for me that came out of the whole Kanhaiya episode was Sitaram Yechuri, in Duppa Paigama Cholawala, reading at JNU a list of student demands to Indira Gandhi, who was standing there and listening. And I was like, wow, this is a picture, man. This is how we should be. This is how we should be talking to each other. It doesn't matter that we don't agree. I mean, in fact, it's important not to agree because, then we get pushed to the edges of our imagination. So that's a good thing. So and I think it's a deliberate attempt not to institutionalize, not simply because they don't want to do what Congress did, but they need to remain like a mobile guerrilla force. That attack from here, attack from there, come from the woods, all of that. So we're always in a state of unsettledness, So, and that is really vicious. I mean, that's a really scary policy, much scarier than authoritarianism and, institutionalization.
But it's also if I might respond quickly, it's also self-destructive because once you have the state,
What's the state
then
for? Yeah.
if you refuse to build up, it's a big problem. So you can see them caught within this contradiction.
That says time up. So we will quickly wrap up.